Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call, excuse me, the State Government Committee informational meeting to order. Ms. Sonia, would you please call the roll?
Chair Hill Evans,
Here.
Representatives Boyd, Brennan, Davidson,
Leave.
Green,
Here.
Genst, Howard,
Leave.
Inglis,
Leave.
Kenyatta,
Leave.
Probst,
Leave.
Sanchez,
Leave.
Schusterman,
Leave.
Waxman,
Leave.
Webster, Chair Roy,
Here.
Representatives Banta, Barger, Bonner, Brown, Diamond, Fink,
Leave.
Kozak,
Leave.
Shalaba,
Leave.
Schaefer,
Leave.
Walsh, Weeknecht. We have a quorum.
Sonia, could you please change Schusterman from leave? She is joining us online this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, good morning, everyone. So nice to see all of you here. This is an informational meeting only. We're not here to talk about any specific legislation, but rather to listen and learn from electoral reform experts on the National Popular Vote, or NPV, and the Ranked Choice Voting, which is RCV. We're joined by various respected authorities from Pennsylvania and outside the Commonwealth. So I want to just thank you all for taking the time to come and for your participation. I do want to note that presenters will have 10 minutes to give their remarks before the committee. Nick Heimball, who is my executive director, will signal when there is 1 minute remaining and wave when the time is up. Staff will be monitoring the timer to try and keep us all on track. Many of us do have other obligations, so we'll be coming and going as members. Members will have designated time to ask questions at the end of each panel. We're also joined this morning by Representative Chris Rabb, who will be providing opening remarks for each one of the panels. And welcome to Chair Roy. Do you have any welcoming remarks, sir?
Just real briefly, good morning, everyone. And I always look forward to informational meetings and hearings to learn more about legislation. And we may as well get started.
Very good. That said, Representative Rabb, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and esteemed colleagues. I first would like to thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for convening this committee meeting to address two topics near and dear to me. As a legislator who's been advocating on these issues consistently over my 5 terms in office, one person, one vote. While a basic concept and a strong belief embraced by many Americans for generations, it has never truly applied to how we elect our president. And when, over the course of our nation's history, who's come in second place for president is sworn into office, it strains the bounds of reason to make sense of a system that allows losers to become winners, securing as their prize nothing less than arguably the most powerful job in the world. This has happened 5 times in our history, twice in the past 25 years. Implementing a national popular vote would forever fix this electoral defect while remaining true to the spirit of the U.S. Constitution and shared understanding of our electorate and society at large that no citizen's vote should have greater weight than any others, whether it's due to what state they live in or any other reason. As we all know, as proud residents of the Keystone State, our Commonwealth has been a prized swing state, one of 7 in recent presidential election cycles that have outsized influence. While such status may confer a certain cachet for members of our political class, that status has conspired to eclipse the value of voters in 43 other states, big and small, rural and densely populated, red and blue. And that's just not right. Nor is it good for our democracy, civic engagement, and an electorate that is increasingly dispirited and distrustful of the electoral system and politics itself. Let me conclude my remarks by emphasizing that the conceptual framework of the national popular vote is intrinsically nonpartisan and has secured meaningful bipartisan support in the many states that have already codified it. I repeat, this idea is not a partisan one. It is a basic one founded on universally understood notions of fairness. And that has been its greatest appeal to me as a legislator, a voter, and a citizen. But don't take my word for it. Pew Research consistently asks voters how they feel about the Electoral College, and last year, 2 out of 3 voters supported electing the president by popular vote. The national popular vote construct works because the Constitution gives states total control over our own electoral votes. If our Commonwealth were to enact this into law, Pennsylvania's 19 electoral votes would go to the candidate who has earned the most votes nationwide. But, and this is important, only after states with the majority of the electors have passed the same law. To date, 17 states and the District of Columbia have passed national popular vote into law. Together, they have 209 of the 270 electors needed to bring the national popular vote law into effect. Once national popular vote passes a handful more states, our presidential elections will finally come under the one person, one vote rule. Every vote will be equal. Every voter in every state will count in every election. And the candidate with the most votes will be guaranteed to go to the White House. One person, one vote. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Representative Rabb. At this point, I would like to note that we have been joined online by Representative Kenyatta and Representative Schusterman. I think I already said that. And we are joined in person by Representative Boyd and Representative Fink. And now let me introduce to you our first panel. Along with Representative Chris Rabb, we have Amy Weidstrom, PhD, Executive Director, League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania. Philip Hensley Robin, Executive Director, Common Cause Pennsylvania. Trent England, Executive Director, Save Our States. Christopher Pearson, National Popular Vote, former Vermont State Senator. Thank you all for being here. And with that, we can begin with Dr. Amy Weidstrom. Thank you.
Hello, and good morning. Good morning, Committee Chair Hill Evans, Chair Roy, and members of the House Government Committee. I'm Dr. Amy Weidstrom, the Executive Director for the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on the national popular vote this morning. I'm here today representing the League of Women Voters, a statewide nonpartisan organization committed to empowering voters and defending democracy. On behalf of our members across the Commonwealth, I'm here to offer strong support for Pennsylvania joining the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact and to support the National Popular Vote movement. The League of Women Voters has long championed a more equitable and representative democracy. The League has always fought to ensure our government reflects the will of the people, including how we elect our representatives and our president. For more than 50 years, the League has called for replacing the Electoral College with direct popular vote. We believe the candidate who earns the most votes should win, an idea that is both simple and foundational to public trust in democracy. Every vote should count equally. It's important to understand that the Constitution does not mandate the Electoral College as we know it today. The Constitution says electors shall meet in their states, cast ballots, and transmit the results. But it says nothing about how states must allocate their electors. Since the 1830s, most states have adopted the winner-take-all method by state law, not by constitutional requirement. And today, Maine and Nebraska use the congressional district method. This power has always rested with the states. So let me underscore this again. How states allocate their electoral votes has always been up to the states. We reject the notion that this approach is, quote, cheating the Constitution. In fact, it is fully aligned with it. A national popular vote is a lawful and deliberate use of state authority rooted in the Elections Clause and reinforced by the 10th Amendment, which reserves to the states and the people all powers not delegated to the federal government. So our position is clear. Pennsylvania should enact legislation that awards our electors to the candidate who wins the national popular vote. One concern might be that Pennsylvania will lose its importance in the political landscape if we had a national popular vote interstate compact. But let's talk candidly about Pennsylvania's place in our current system. Yes, we're considered a swing state today. Candidates campaign here, advertise here, and care deeply about what our voters think. But this wasn't always the case, and there's no guarantee it will remain that way. Just look at Ohio and Florida, both once pivotal states that are now largely ignored by presidential campaigns. The truth is, the Electoral College gives power to a few states, but only as long as they remain politically competitive. The League believes that we must look beyond short-term political advantages and focus on what truly strengthens our democracy. When candidates campaign in a state, voter engagement rises. In the last election, while national turnout declined, 4 of the 7 swing states, including Pennsylvania, saw turnout increase. Why? Because that's where the attention was focused. If every state mattered and candidates campaigned everywhere, we would see more votes energized and engaged. Awarding our electors to the national popular vote winner would ensure that Pennsylvania voters remain important to candidates and campaigns. This is what makes the compact so smart and lawful. It works within the constitutional framework. It keeps the Electoral College intact, but makes it function more like a true democracy where every vote in every state carries equal weight. Moreover, history shows us that states have always had the power and responsibility to lead on electoral reforms. Before the ratification of the 19th Amendment, it was states that gave women the right to vote, with Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and Washington among the early trailblazers, passing laws to enfranchise women long before it became national law. This moment is no different. Through the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, states are again stepping forward to strengthen the voice of the people. The compact is a state-based solution that ensures every voter in every state is heard, regardless of party and regardless of geography. And finally, let's be clear, this is what the people want. Since the 1940s, when national polling, as we understand it today, began, a majority of Americans have supported reforming or abolishing the Electoral College. Today, 63% of Americans favor a national popular vote, with even higher support among our younger voters, the very people we are all working so hard to bring into the electoral process. For over a century, the League of Women Voters has fought to expand access to the ballot, advance civil rights, and defend every American's voice in our democracy. We stood with the suffragists who fought state by state for women's voting rights. We backed civil rights leaders pressing for reforms at every level. And now we stand with a growing movement of states demanding that the will of the people decide our highest office. We have come close to reform before. Let's not miss this moment. I'll close with a story. I have teenagers. And so during the last election, I was driving my 15-year-old daughter and her friend home from school. When they asked me, why would I vote? It doesn't really matter because of the Electoral College. As a political scientist, trained political scientist, former college professor, I tried my best to talk with them about the importance of voting, how their votes are cast and counted, and the value of a Republican form of government, a representative form of government. But I don't think I convinced them. So for the millions of Americans who feel that their vote doesn't count, who feel disconnected, disillusioned, and dismissed, a national popular vote offers something powerful. The promise that every vote in every state truly matters. And this is how we build a stronger, more inclusive democracy. So we urge Pennsylvania lawmakers to join the growing number of states that have chosen to lead. It is time for us to act, not in pursuit of partisan advantage, but in defense of the most American of ideas, that the people should choose the representatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Philip Hensley Robin, Executive Director for Common Cause Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chair Roy, Chair Hill Evans, members of the committee, and of course, Representative Rabb for your leadership on this important issue. Thank you for the opportunity to share some remarks today. Thank you. Is that better?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to share some remarks today on the importance of the national popular vote. My name is Philip Hensley Robin. I'm the Executive Director of Common Cause Pennsylvania. We are a nonpartisan voting rights and democracy reform organization. We have been dedicated to making government more accountable to we the people since 1970. Common Cause has long advocated for reforming the way we elect the president because the current system is fundamentally unrepresentative. Legitimacy of our elections and public confidence in our system of government flow from a few simple principles. First, every vote and every voter is equal. Second, the candidate with the most votes wins. Every election conducted in this country operates on this one person, one vote principle. It's how we elect our senators, our members of Congress, our governors, our state legislators, our local officials. I said every election, but of course, every election except one, the election for president. Because each state allocates their electoral votes to the winner of their own states, most voters are sidelined every 4 years. As a result of this system, the winner of the popular vote has not been elected as president 5 times in our history. 1 in 14 presidential elections, and 2 in just this century have ended in the popular vote winner losing the election. When the candidate earning a majority of votes does not win an election, it really undermines faith in our system of government. And the American people agree that the system is unjust. In recent polling, nearly 2/3 of Americans agree that the system should be changed to a national popular vote. And elected officials from both parties, from big states and small states, rural and urban states, have agreed about the need to move to a popular vote system. I think notably, President Trump, whom I admittedly don't agree with on most things, has been a clear and consistent advocate for a nationwide popular vote. In 2012, he said, and I quote, "The Electoral College is a disaster for democracy, a total sham." In 2016, he again called for the president to be elected by a popular vote because, quote, "it brings all the states into play." And he reiterated his stance in 2018 after the election, saying, quote, "I would rather have a popular vote." In short, this is not a partisan issue. It's not a red or blue issue. It's not a liberal or democratic issue. It's common sense. It's about fairness. Americans across partisan and political lines agree. So if we all agree that this is a problem, how do we address it? The shortcomings of the current system stem from the winner-take-all laws that award all of a state's electoral votes to the candidate receiving the most popular votes in each state. The national popular vote law we're advocating for would bring states together in an interstate compact to mutually pledge their electors to the winner of the national popular vote. It would take effect when enacted by states with the majority of the electoral votes. That's 270 of 538. Then, the presidential candidate receiving the most popular votes in all 50 states and DC will receive all the electoral votes from the enacting states. This is possible because the current method states use to allocate their electoral votes, the winner-take-all method, is just not in the U.S. Constitution and was not even mentioned at the Constitutional Convention. States have the power to choose presidential electors as their own laws direct. Throughout history, electors have been elected using different methods, by a congressional district, chosen directly by the legislature. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled in multiple cases that the state's power to choose the manner of selecting electors is, quote, supreme. It is plenary and exclusive. As with other powers entrusted to the states, it is an application, not a circumvention, of the Constitution when the states utilize those powers as they see fit. The framers specifically enacted the provisions relating to the Electoral College to allow for state innovation and flexibility. This is important because it impacts the question of congressional consent. Some have asked whether the states can even do this without permission from Congress. The United States Supreme Court answered that question when it ruled in U.S. Steel versus Multi-State Tax Commission and other cases that congressional consent is only necessary for interstate compacts that encroach upon or interfere with the just supremacy of the United States. The Supreme Court has also ruled in McPherson versus Blacker that states have exclusive and plenary power to choose the method of appointing their presidential electors. Because the choice of manner of appointing presidential electors is exclusively a state decision, there is no federal power or federal supremacy for the states to encroach upon. Therefore, under established compact jurisprudence, congressional consent would not be necessary for the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact to become effective. This is a power reserved to the states. The National Popular Vote Law is a constitutionally conservative, state-based approach that retains the power of the states to control how the president is elected and, in fact, retains the Electoral College. It represents really the best of our system of federalism. Our states using their powers under the Constitution to act together to the benefit of their citizens. And it's popular, as I've been saying. National popular vote has been enacted into law by 18 jurisdictions, including 6 small states, 9 medium-sized states, and 3 large states. These jurisdictions have 209 of the 270 electoral votes needed to activate the law. There's momentum behind this reform. One myth about the national popular vote is that it would mean candidates would ignore some parts of the country if it were enacted. They would only campaign in big cities or only campaign in large states. As we see from the number of states that have enacted this can't be the case. But more so, evidence as to how a nationwide presidential campaign would be run can be found by examining the way presidential candidates currently campaign inside battleground states, and, in fact, the way all non-presidential candidates currently campaign in their elections. So, for example, in campaigns for statewide office in Pennsylvania, the big cities do not receive all the attention, and they certainly do not control the outcome. Because every vote is equal in our elections, candidates avidly seek out voters in small, medium, and large towns. Candidates campaign in rural and suburban areas. They visit the Lehigh Valley and the Mon Valley. They hold rallies in Erie, Reading, and Scranton. A candidate who limited their campaigning just to the biggest cities would be guaranteed to lose, and frankly, they would deserve to lose. The itineraries of presidential candidates in battleground states and their allocation of campaign resources demonstrates what every gubernatorial candidate, every senatorial candidate in every state already knows. Namely, that when every vote matters, the campaign must be run in every part of the state. With a national popular vote, this would be reflected in every single state, in every region of the country, in every election. Finally, I want to address how this system might impact Pennsylvania and Pennsylvanians in particular. Although some might argue that Pennsylvania as a current battleground state has received disproportionate attention as a result of this winner-take-all system, this would be enormously short-sighted. Pennsylvania is currently a battleground because recent elections for president here have been close and competitive. But political coalitions and electoral outcomes will shift, and Pennsylvania will not forever be as politically competitive as it is today. Under the current system, it is a guarantee that Pennsylvania will join the ranks of the so-called spectator states that are routinely ignored in presidential elections. The only way to ensure that Pennsylvania voters will be heard in every election is to enact the national popular vote. In conclusion, I just want to return to where I began my remarks. The principle that every vote matters, that the candidate who receives the most votes should win, is fundamental to our system of government. Americans agree with that across partisan and ideological lines. This is an essential reform, and I want to thank the committee for holding this meeting on this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Trent England.
Thank you to the chair and all the members and my fellow panelists, Representative Rabb. It's great to be here and to have this conversation. I am Trent England. I'm the founder and executive director of Save Our States. And I created Save Our States back in 2009 because I think this is a valuable debate. And frankly, when you create your own job, you should always do that with an eye toward what's actually fun to talk about and work on. And I think this is one of those issues. There are great arguments on both sides. I have the benefit, I think, on my side of being able to talk a little bit more about the details, because with the National Popular Vote Compact, the devil really is in the details. But I want to break this down in 3 tiers because I think it's important to think about some of the arguments that we've heard in terms of where they fit in these 3 tiers, and that is the concept, right, of a direct election for president. Right, that's one conversation, right? Do we want to have a direct election of president? And until 2001, everyone always assumed that that was a debate about amending the Constitution, right? You're going to change from a state-based electoral system to a direct election of the president. You would amend the Constitution, right? That debate really goes to this concept, right? Do you want a true direct election? A national popular vote, of course, cannot actually create a national popular vote, right? It tries to synthesize that. It tries to sort of fake it till you make it. But this is one question, right? Do you want a national popular vote versus the Electoral College? Then you have the concept of the compact, right? The idea behind the compact. And this is distinct from the compact itself. You don't have to take my word for it. I included some information in my packet in this regard. The three law professors who came up with the concept for making this change through an interstate compact, for making this change by changing how states choose their presidential electors, don't actually support the compact. They don't support the National Popular Vote Compact as written, right? So there is the idea of doing this by a compact. That's the second tier, right? And then there's the third tier, which is the actual text of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And I'm going to talk about each of these things, but I think we have to keep that in mind, right? That ultimately, there is a National Popular Vote Compact. It is what you call in law school an adhesion contract, which is to say it's take it or leave it. You don't get to change it. You don't get to amend it. You have to accept it as it is. Now, you can't take a step back and say, maybe there's a better way to do this. Maybe there's a better compact that we could write. And that is essentially what the founding fathers, these three law professors who after Bush v. Gore wrote a couple of articles suggesting, well, maybe states could change their laws and force the Electoral College to rubber stamp a national popular vote result, right? I mean, you could go back to them, right? Who, they're not here because they don't like the compact as it's written, and maybe they could come up with something that would work better. But I think it's really important, right? You can't, people have talked about the polling. Well, the polling asks people, hey, Electoral College or direct election. It does not ask people Electoral College or National Popular Vote Compact. And when that question was put on the ballot in Colorado, it barely passed, right? The National Popular Vote Compact in blue Colorado barely squeaked by. And the folks who are, the National Popular Vote Campaign was getting ready to put this on the ballot next year in Nevada, and they just pulled the plug. Democrats in Nevada just killed the National Popular Vote Compact because they didn't want it to go to the ballot there next year. Right? So, we all know in politics, the public opinion polls that matter are at the ballot box ultimately. And there seems to be a recognition even on the side of the National Popular Vote Campaign that there's a disconnect between the polling and the actual compact, right? And whether voters will support it. So let's talk just a little bit about the concept of direct election, right? What are the upsides of the Electoral College? Because people have talked about the downsides, right? But why do we have an Electoral College? When the framers of the Constitution got to the convention in May of 1787, the default was a parliamentary system. That was in the rough drafts of the Constitution, right? Was just to have Congress elect a president. That was the default. That was the assumption. And that is still how many countries, right? Canada elects their prime minister through a parliamentary system, which means, by the way, in any of those in most of those parliamentary systems, and this has happened in Canada in two recent elections, a party can receive fewer popular votes than the other party and still win the most seats in parliament and therefore elect the prime minister. Again, right, Canada in their last two elections, the party that won fewer popular votes went on to choose the prime minister. Right now it's a slightly different system, but it's still a two-step geographically districted system, right? So we talk about all these democracies around the world and pretend, I guess, that everybody, just has a direct election for their executive. It's just not true. Now, why did we not wind up with a parliamentary system? Because the framers of the Constitution wanted better checks and balances. How do you get better checks and balances? You get it with separation of powers. They wanted an executive that was more independent. And so ultimately, they settled on this idea of an electoral college, which is kind of like you have the states create a body that's modeled after Congress, right? The power in the electoral college, exactly the same as Congress, but it just pops up, chooses the president, goes away, right? So the president is not beholden to Congress, is not beholden to other elected officials in D.C. That's why we have the electoral college, right? And it still serves those purposes. But it also serves another purpose, right? Which is checks and balances. And we all understand checks and balances is in conflict with democratic outcomes, right? That's the point, right? Majorities don't always instantly get their way in everything they want. The Bill of Rights is the most anti-democratic part of our Constitution. I'll say that again. The Bill of Rights is the most anti-democratic part of our Constitution, right? So the Electoral College puts a check, an upper limit on how much power any one state can have in the process, right? That's people talking about big states, small states. But every state, there's just an upper limit on how much power it can have that pushes the power out, that creates a kind of a balance. This is why India uses a version of an electoral college in one of its national elections, right? This is one of the benefits that countries get out of having a parliamentary system, right? When you break an election down and you do it in 2 steps and you have geographically based districts, you get these kind of checks and balances. Now, are there trade-offs? Sure, there are trade-offs in any electoral system, but these are clearly the benefits of the electoral college. And it was interesting to me that people have talked about having a political system that I think was mentioned, promotes diversity and inclusivity. That's actually one of the reasons why I came to the belief that the Electoral College is so important. Because when you look at the effect of this system of checks and balances over American history, particularly after the Civil War, this is the most dramatic. These incentives operate all the time. The most dramatic influence of the Electoral College, right? What did the Democrats have to do after the Civil War? 2 of these elections, when when one party won the most popular votes and the other party won the presidency, came after the Civil War as Reconstruction was breaking down. The Democratic Party could win the most popular votes in the Deep South, but they couldn't win it spread across enough states to win the White House, to win the Electoral College. So what did they have to do? What did the Democratic Party have to do? Right, and this is a time when the political coalition in the South includes the Ku Klux Klan, right? But at the same time, the Democratic Party determined they had to reach out to Irish and German Catholic immigrants in northern cities who Republicans were essentially turning their noses up at, right? Saying, well, we can win these northern states without these, these Catholics. We don't want them in our coalition. So the Democrats smartly said, we want them in our coalition, right? The reason why John F. Kennedy was a Democrat a few generations later is because of the Electoral College. It's probably why he was a big supporter of the Electoral College in the 1950s. The Electoral College actually forces our parties to be more diverse. First geographically, but by forcing them to be geographically more diverse, they have to be more diverse in many other ways, right? So this is a good thing. And in the 1950s, why were some people trying to get rid of the Electoral College? Well, they were Southern Democrats, and they said bluntly that the Electoral College was forcing the Democratic Party to pay what they thought was too much attention to Black and Jewish voters. So they wanted to get rid of the Electoral College. 1 minute. The Electoral College actually promotes, I think, some of the things that we all agree on here, right? The value of broad coalitions, the value of consensus building, the value of diversity. At the same time, the compact is just silent on how you deal with basic questions like recounts. States that use alternative voting methods like ranked choice voting, which I know we're going to talk about in the next panel. Right, the way that the compact is written sort of freezes in time, the way elections worked in 2005, 2006, when it was written, and makes no account for the changes that we've seen in the way states hold their elections, the disturbing trends that we've seen develop around presidential elections, right? There's nothing in the compact about conflicts between states, how you referee those. It's like it's like a water compact where you have upriver states that aren't participating, right? The idea that you're going to have a few states change presidential elections unilaterally. So with that, I look forward to all of your questions.
Thank you. I think next is Mr. Christopher Pearson.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, Chair Roy, members of the committee for having this important discussion today. My name is Chris Pearson. I had the great honor of serving 14 years in the Vermont legislature between the House and the Senate, and finished there in 2022. I'm here today on behalf of National Popular Vote. Throughout my time as a legislator, I also had the great privilege of traveling this country and talking about National Popular Vote in State House after State House. You've heard a good description of National Popular Vote from Representative Rabb and other supporters in the coalition, so I won't dwell on that. From our opponents today, you've heard the same arguments we've heard over the years and that ultimately didn't carry weight after a thorough examination in the 18 states that have enacted National Popular Vote. You've heard, I think, grossly exaggerated comments like that the current system forces one to build a broad coalition, completely overlooking the fact that 94% of the election we've just come through last year took place in 7 states when you look at campaign events and where the candidates actually spent money and held polls and rallies and built coalitions on the ground. That was in 7 states, hardly a broad coalition. You've heard that there are professors that don't like this. It just overlooks the fact that, in fact, this idea originated in a law review article in the 1970s. You've heard our opponents discuss small concepts, I guess I would say, the minutia. They never address opponents in the current the problems that are rampant in the current system, nor do they admit that national popular vote actually would solve these problems. They know 2 out of 3 voters support a popular vote. They can't argue with the idea that a candidate with the most votes should win or that candidates should campaign everywhere. They simply don't deal with the big issues of our broken presidential election process. Instead, they dwell in the minutia, and even there, they simply are not factual. So I will try today to point to existing federal law, to the language of the compact, and other easily verifiable facts, and set the record straight. If anybody here would like a discussion on international systems, I'm not your expert. You heard briefly mentioned and in written comments that there is a great uncertainty of how national popular vote would work together with ranked choice voting. And that is now law for presidential elections in Maine, Alaska, and District of Columbia. There is no legitimate uncertainty of how these two would operate together because laws in all 3 of those jurisdictions specifically state that the vote tally from the final round of the ranked choice vote counting will be used for computing the national popular vote. The Maine statute, just as an example, reads, quote, "When the National Popular Vote for President Act governs the appointment of presidential electors, the statewide number of votes for each presidential slate that received votes in the final round is deemed to be the determination of vote in the state for the purposes of the National Popular Vote Compact." Pretty clear. In fact, this argument was made by Save Our States last year in Maine, and it didn't work. Maine was the last state to join the compact, enacting it a year ago. In written comments, you will see that our opponents claim there's no such thing as a national popular vote tally. They believe that they would have you believe there's no official, timely, accurate, or conclusive presidential vote count. In fact, federal law requires a conclusive count ahead of the meeting of electors, and then states in the National Popular Vote Compact simply add these results together. We've heard sometimes, you'll read it in written comments, that we can't count on states to produce an accurate count. But they would have us just simply gloss over the count in Florida in 2000, where the election was settled by 537 votes, or the narrow 78,000 vote margin across Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania that decided the 2016 election. And they overlook that razor-thin margins routinely dictate the outcome now in just a small number of states, whereas the average popular vote margin is 4 million votes. It's much more robust and worthy of confidence than what we have today. Some of the written comments from our opponents say that states will have to rely on estimated totals. But in fact, this stems from a compact state looking to other states and trying to figure out what their total is. In fact, the National Popular Vote Compact does not demand anything from non-enacting states, and those states simply have to follow federal law, which requires, again, a timely, accurate, and completed vote count 6 days ahead of the meeting of the electors. You'll read in our opponents' comments that under national popular vote, there's a risk of non-citizens voting. Actually, federal law prevents non-citizens from voting for Congress and president. It is very clean. You'll read that there might be an increase in litigation and controversy under national popular vote. Let's spend a little bit of time on this because it overlooks the system we live in today. In 2020, there were 64 lawsuits filed contesting the outcome, many of them here in the Commonwealth. These came under the current system because 11,000 votes decided Georgia. Roughly, that's the same total that decided Arizona, and 20,000 votes decided Wisconsin. So these lawsuits were an attempt to change the outcome in the 3 decisive states with razor-thin margins in an election where the popular vote margin was 7 million votes. Ask yourself which system is more vulnerable to litigation and controversy. There's also an assertion that national popular vote will create a lot of problems and disputes between states. But under the national popular vote and the current system, there are 5 well-established, frequently used methods to resolve disputes. State administrative proceedings like recounts, state courts, state Supreme Courts, federal courts, and the U.S. ultimately Supreme Court. Recounts is the same theme, this problem that exists, in fact, today. They are a big problem today and all but irrelevant under national popular vote. States should fix recount laws, or Congress should step in and set standards for recounts in presidential elections. But look at the current system. Since 2000, just 2 of 6 requested recounts actually took place in presidential elections. In the 2000 election, the Bush campaign effectively used the courts to block the recount in an election that was won by 537 votes in the state that determined the national outcome. 2004, a recount was blocked in Ohio. In 2016, Wisconsin held a recount, but 2 others were blocked by the prevailing candidate. In 2020, only Georgia held a recount, despite counts being vigorously disputed in 5 other states. Recounts are a significant issue today. Since the national popular vote margin is on average 15 times greater than the decisive margin in the key states, using national popular vote is actually a protective measure against the impact of recounts. There's a theme from our opponents that states have no power to contest or judge other state results or will use estimated totals. And all of this is nonsense and misses a key fact. Real candidates are involved. The candidates are the party with judicial standing. They have the ability and the incentive to raise every possible issue in every state. And once again, under a popular vote with a large margin, the outcome in the decisive states that we see today, which is a razor-thin margin, is no longer holding up the entire country and no longer has the same impact that we live with today. It's difficult to attack the merits of one person, one vote. It's difficult to argue that every voter in the country should matter and play a meaningful role no matter where they live. It's hard to dispute that candidates should campaign everywhere, and it's all but impossible to argue that top vote getter should win the election. That's why opponents of the national popular vote don't try. They hope to distract you with half the story and hope that you won't fill in the blanks. National popular vote has passed into law in 18 states precisely because we have good, fact-based answers to all of these objections. I hope we can continue this important discussion and have Pennsylvania be one of the additional 5 to 8 states required to bring national popular vote into effect, and then, as Congressman Jamie Raskin said, quote, reawaken politics in all parts of this country. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now going to go to our, thank you all candidates, panelists. We're now going to go to our question and answer. I have 1 or 2 questions, but I will defer to Chair Roy to ask his questions. And then if any of the members have questions, let us know so we can have you ask your questions. Chair Roy?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, folks, for your testimony. Now, it was stated earlier that there's been 5 times where the loser won. I guess how I look at it, you can have a football team that gets 300 yards of offense, they get 14 points. Another team has 100 yards of offense, but they have 15 points, and they win. That's what the rules are. So the way the rules are written in the Constitution, whoever gets the most electoral votes wins. So I would maintain that every single time, all 43 times, the candidate with the most popular vote won. I think there's 3 or 4 times where somebody took office, from the president dying or resigning or something. But every single time, the person that was supposed to win, that they won based on what the rules are. But I guess my question is, if this compact would happen, when you're thinking about every vote matters, hypothetically, in Pennsylvania, you could have 55% of the voters vote for candidate A, 45% vote for candidate B, But nationally, if candidate B had more votes, wouldn't that disenfranchise Pennsylvania voters? If 55% of the voters in PA voted for candidate A, but then all the electors, voted for candidate B, I mean, it sounds like, every vote would not matter. I mean, hypothetically, you could have 5 million people vote for candidate A, 0 people vote for candidate B, but if candidate B won nationally, the Pennsylvania electors would be voting for the candidate that not a single voter voted for. It likely wouldn't be that big of a swing, but my point is, it seems like it would be disenfranchising voters. How would it not? Like they'd be looking at, okay, we're not going to think about how Pennsylvania voters voted. We're going to look, how did California vote? How did New York vote? How did Texas vote? We're not going to worry about how our own voters voted. How do you reconcile that?
Can I speak to that? Because I actually think it's a little bit worse than that. Because under the National Popular Vote if you look back at the history of constitutional amendment proposals to change the Electoral College, there was always a recognition that you need some kind of if you switch to a system like that, you need some kind of a threshold so that you make sure you don't have a small plurality winner, right? You don't wind up like the French system where, the French system has a runoff, but if they didn't have a runoff, you just took their first election, then in one of the recent elections, the candidate with 23% of the vote would have won, right? So any serious proposal before national popular vote had a runoff or some kind of a provision to prevent that. National popular vote doesn't do that, right? 23% A-OK, which means you open the door to very regional kinds of candidates. You encourage, more billionaires to jump in, right? Michael Bloomberg never would have spent his billions in the Democratic primary. He just would have ran as an independent if you had a national popular vote, because you have a third serious candidate, all of a sudden you can win easily with under 40% of the vote, which gets you to a place where you might not even have candidates running in all states. You could have a candidate who's not on the ballot in Pennsylvania under the National Popular Vote Compact win all of Pennsylvania's electoral votes, right? So that is the potential for disenfranchisement under their system.
There's a lot to unpack in your question. First of all, in 1969, Congress in the House did pass by a robust bipartisan vote an amendment to abolish the Electoral College. It did not require a majority threshold. And in fact, it just simply depended on the candidate with the most votes. So it built right into the state system that we have today. But to your question, keep in mind that there's essentially two processes. There's a November process where Americans go to the polls, and there is the technical process in the middle of December where electors meet and carry out their a bureaucratic function in a sense. And right now, most states, I want to say it's about 45% of voters in the country live in a state where they don't happen to agree with the plurality in their state. So, in an extreme example, a Democrat in Oklahoma always sees their vote get transitioned to Republican electors. So there is a routine disenfranchisement, if to use your term, right now in every state. What you're describing in terms of who Pennsylvania picks under national popular vote versus who wins the election is accurate. You may not have a candidate prevail in Pennsylvania and then have that candidate get the electors because they got the most votes in the country. But I'll use my own example. It didn't do me a lot of good when John Kerry got 3 electors out of Vermont in 2004. I wasn't jumping up and down and cheering because the candidate I supported won Vermont. He lost the election. And keep in mind, national popular vote lets my vote and your vote and everyone's vote across the country just simply be added to supporters of my candidate all across the country. And when you get the most votes, you win. I'll just say that in your question, there was also a comment about, won't we be swamped, maybe I'm paraphrasing, by California and New York? right? The two of our biggest states. California and New York have 18% of the country's population combined. And they are two big Democratic-leaning states. But then there's Texas and Florida, the second and third largest states, and they're Republican-leaning. And even out of just those four largest states, you're coming up fairly balanced. And then there's a swath of red states across the South. So then the Republican has a margin. When every vote is equal, the election doesn't become about winning states in the way we think of it today. It becomes about margins everywhere. And so in a safe blue state like mine, suddenly the Democrats are trying to run up the total, get more of their supporters to the vote, to vote. And Republicans, for the first time, are trying to shrink their loss in Vermont and trying to get their people to the polls. And that's in a tiny state with 3 electors. That will be happening and replicated all across the country. And it's why a lot of us think that this is really important for the health of our democracy.
Thank you. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, we have Representative Boyd. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panelists. This is a fascinating subject. I was a history professor before I did this job, so I've taught the Electoral College 30 times. And I promise you, students don't get it. It's very challenging for them to understand. When I explain national popular vote, they're like, oh, I get that. That's interesting to me. And I was thinking of the woman on the end. I'm sorry, I forgot your name. I have a teenage son as well. And the teenagers this year were really struggling. They were frustrated. And I think that we get really, we're political animals, all of us up here, I promise you, and probably some of you all. And we think about important details, obviously, and the outcomes of elections. But when I think that my job here is to represent my constituents, they want their vote to be counted, and they feel like their vote isn't counted in this current situation. And I live in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, which has felt like the eye of the storm of politics in Pennsylvania for a while now. Go knock on a door 25 times and they're told your vote is more important than your other people in Pennsylvania, and we need you to come out to vote. They're sick of it. They're tired of being asked for their vote more than other people too. So on both sides, like right now, I've been in the center of important elections for our voters, and they really want to just be counted. They just want to vote and care and know that their vote mattered to the outcome of that election, and they don't want to be told that it's complicated. I don't want to explain the Electoral College at the door to a voter. And I just really thank you all for the work that you've done. I don't have a question as much as to state that I really think that this is the way that as elected officials, our job is to represent our constituents, and our voters want their vote to be heard, and they don't want to be explained to why it isn't. And I really appreciate the work that the National Popular Vote has done towards that end.
Thank you, Representative Boyd. Representative Barger?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Quick question. Is it 18 states or 17 states plus D.C.?
Thank you. It is 17 states plus
Okay.
D.C.
And what you said was, or someone said, you need 23 of the 50 states to. How many more do you need for this to be national law?
It's not a number of states, it's a number of electoral votes. So we need a majority of the electoral votes, at least 270.
Gotcha.
So we're 61 electoral votes shy.
Gotcha. Okay, just out of clarification, I didn't know which way I was going to go. Second, so my primary question is this: out of the 17 states plus D.C. that have enacted or signed on to this compact, how many of them leaned towards the Republican candidate for president this last term?
I believe they were all Democratic states this last term. I would say the New York Senate was controlled by Republicans when New York enacted this bill. We have
I see. Thank you. I see a distinction between down ballot races and the presidential election for president is the only race that everyone in the country votes for. That's the only one. So I don't personally like the comparison to down ballot races, but I will tell you this: as a newcomer to the political scene, one of the things I have realized is that we politicians will never voluntarily yield power. We are not prone to doing that. And so it's conspicuous to me that there is not one state that voted for a Republican candidate for president who thinks this is a good idea. So it smells to me like holding on to power or trying to seize power. That's what it seems like to me. This doesn't seem bipartisan. Our panel doesn't seem bipartisan to me. And the states signing on to the compact certainly don't seem like bipartisan support to me. That's my observation. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Rep. Barker, are there any other questions from members? Yes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Just a question as a whole. If we were to transition this to the national popular vote, it would sure make the one person, one vote that you are talking about extremely important, which would then make voter verification even more important. So of the panel, how many of you, just by a show of hands, would support voter ID? Just one of you would support voter
ID is a
identification?
concept. There are many different ways to implement it. That's a hypothetical that no one reasonable in the legislative process can respond to unless we see the details. Just like
Well,
any
just
number of things.
identifying that you are eligible to vote in this country.
We have that currently.
According to whom?
Federal
There's
and
no,
state
there's
law.
no voter verification in the state of Pennsylvania. You do not have to produce an identification to vote in the state of Pennsylvania.
If I may, Representative, under current law,
No,
you're-
excuse me. No, we're getting off course here. We're here for the national popular vote, and that's what we're going to stay to. So if you have questions of this panel regarding the information that they provided to us about national popular vote, that's fine. Otherwise, I think the voter ID would be a subject for another informational meeting. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Seeing no other questions? Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Kenyatta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to me, and I appreciate you having this hearing, Madam Chair. I think to me this boils down to really two questions that we have to try to answer as a body. The first is, can we do this? And I think from Dr. Whitestrom, who testified, and others, I think the legal basis that undergirds Pennsylvania's ability to do this is pretty sound. And so I think that question we can answer affirmatively. Can we do this? I think the answer is yes. And then I think the second question that we have to answer is, should we do this? And I think answering that question requires you to answer a question that I have not heard from opponents of this, either from testifiers or members who've asked questions on this panel today, whether or not we believe simply that every vote should count. You know, all of us have stood for election. And I don't think any of us in the legislature would abide by a system where we get the most votes in our district, but then some other board or panel or somewhere else in the Commonwealth gets to then decide that we somehow did not win that election. You know, one of the good gentlemen said that the presidency is unique in that is the only race where every voter gets to participate. That is accurate. But it's also the only election where every voter participates and we don't then respect their votes. We're in a situation where I think, unfortunately, everything gets viewed through these diametric partisan lenses, and this is wrong. You know, I know there are some folks who are going to cheer the point that I'm about to make, but the current president just a couple of months ago got the most votes. I'm not happy with that outcome, as I've made very clear. Just follow me on Twitter. But I also believe that a majority of Americans voted. And we have a responsibility to respect that outcome. And so my support of this is not grounded in trying to tea leaf who is going to most benefit, the Democrats or the Republicans, I don't much care. What I do care about is whether or not we abide by a basic system of fairness across the electoral process. And I, Madam Chair, I just want to say briefly, because it was mentioned, but I promise to be very brief. It is also disconcerting to have folks who have stood for election who constantly say there is no voter verification in Pennsylvania. Okay, sorry, Madam Chair. But
Madam Chair, can I answer that? So, I mean, to the first point, just very briefly, obviously, being one out of all the panelists up here, I don't have time to cover everything that everybody else said. But the legal basis for this, I think, is not entirely clear because obviously it's never been tested and can't be tested unless it takes effect. There is a legitimate question as to whether the Supreme Court would uphold the use of a constitutional power to destroy the purpose of that power. Everybody understands, I don't think that we'd have any disagreement here, that the purpose of the Electoral College clauses in the Constitution was to have this state-based system, right? That state legislators' job, as it was envisioned by the people who wrote these clauses, was to determine how best to represent their own state, not to give those electors away. And the scenario I would give you is, what if Pennsylvania had a budget shortfall and decided we're going to auction off our electors, right? Could you give the power to choose your electors to the government of China in exchange for a battery plant or something, right? Like there probably are some limits on how you can use that power in Article 2 in the 12th Amendment, right? So is the National Popular Vote Compact a legitimate exercise of that power, trying to destroy the purpose of that power? The courts would decide. On your other point, though, I do think that I spoke to this idea, right, of do we value, I mean, just stepping back from the details of the compact, right, do we value more democratic outcomes or individual rights? Because if we value democratic outcomes more than individual rights, we should abolish the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is the most anti-democratic part of the Constitution. If you want democracy, get rid of the Bill of Rights. Right? Simple. Right? The Electoral College is about checks and balances. Everything in the Constitution that creates checks and balances, that slows things down, that requires concurrent majorities, is a burden on, if not a barrier to, direct democratic outcomes, right? The Electoral College is not unique in that way, nor is the parliamentary system in Canada, which allows a candidate whose party receives fewer votes nationwide to become the Prime Minister of Canada, right? Japan, Israel, UK, Australia, all these systems work that way. So no, I'm very comfortable saying I don't bow down to democracy. I don't think that just because a majority of people want to abuse someone's civil rights, we should allow them to do that. And I'm very glad that the current occupant of the White House, though he won the most popular votes, does not have, I hope, unfettered power. And I suspect you join me in opposing him, claiming to have a democratic mandate that gives him unfettered power rather than our system of checks and balances.
Thank you. And I have one final question for this panel, and it is for Mr. Philip Hensley Robin. You pointed out that 5 of our 46 presidents have taken office without winning the most votes, and that such outcomes undermine faith in our democracy. So how does the current electoral college system effectively disenfranchise millions of voters, and how would a national popular vote remedy that imbalance, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. So our current system, as we've heard, does disenfranchise voters across the country because their states don't matter. Candidates don't campaign in their states. There's no spending on elections in their states for president. 6 or 7 states get all the attention, and the remaining states are spectator states because everyone knows how their electors are going to vote. There's no question about the outcome in the election. And the national popular vote would fix that because every vote in every state would matter. We would have a system where candidates would run campaigns in every state. And I think there's a question of, is the presidency different? Should elections be run differently for president? And I think, just think to yourself, should we run our elections for governor or for Senate on a county-based electoral college system? I don't think anyone's ever really suggested that seriously. The benefits of a one-person, one-vote system are obvious. They're the legitimate foundation of our system of government. And, for my fellow panelists who think we should take lessons from Canada or other countries, I think Americans are really attached to the idea that they get to vote directly for president. And we just need that system to work. And it's not working currently, and a national popular vote system would make it work.
Okay, thank you. And I do want to say thank you to each and all of the panelists here today. I appreciate your input. Thank you for taking the time to come to us. And at this point, I'm going to offer a 2-minute stand up and stretch to give enough time for our panelists, our second panel, to come before us. And if any of you don't mind sticking around for any additional questions after the meeting is over, we'd really appreciate it if you have time. Thank you so much. Ready to convene? If our second panel would please take your seats. Okay. We are ready with our second panel. And joining us again is Representative Chris Rabb, Jeremy Rose, Evidence and Learning Manager for Fair Vote, Trent England, again, thank you for continuing, Executive Director for Save Our States, and Armin Sami, Founder, RCVIS, and Volunteer March on Harrisburg. Okay, so Rep. Rabb, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. This is a very surreal experience for me after 8+ years in the legislature. Having two topics come up in one meeting, I feel like it's Christmas come early. So, yes, it will absolutely never happen again, I'm sure. So I'm milking this experience for all I can. But despite my 20-minute remarks that I will be I'm kidding. I'm actually going to be far more concise because I'm surrounded by folks who know a great deal about ranked choice voting. Regardless of the position, I respect the level of care and expertise and perspective on these issues. Just the fact that you've allowed this meeting to take place to talk about these innovations is both anomalous and deeply meaningful, because there are not enough conversations about the substance of policies that can be turned into legislation that can help our Commonwealth and our nation, and however we choose to do that. And there may be common ground that comes out of this, but we wouldn't know if you didn't convene the meeting. So there are not a lot of opportunities for this, so I'm very appreciative. I'm not going to be talking about what ranked choice voting is, because I have these folks to do that. I can tell you that I'm someone who is deeply committed to civic innovation, and to democracy, and to also saving taxpayer money, and to efficiency, to deeper and more broad civic engagement. And as someone who comes from a small town in southeast Pennsylvania known as Philadelphia, I have direct and personal experience weathering some of the most blistering negative campaigns, and that's just among Democrats. And one of the many things I like about ranked choice voting is that there is a strong belief and pattern to suggest that playing nicely as a candidate is not just the right thing, but it could be the efficacious thing. Because so many of our constituents, neighbors, family members, colleagues do not like the rough and tumble, sharp-elbowed nature of campaigning, and how we know that negatively impacts voters who are already distrustful, disengaged, skeptical. And so anything that will facilitate greater collaboration, a greater care about the issues, while also making the process of electing folks easier and at more cost-effective ways, is something that I'm deeply interested in. And how ranked choice voting can be implemented, be enacted into law, is not just one way. There are myriad ways to do that. And what I like about this meeting is we're not talking about a particular bill. We're talking about the conceptual framework of ranked choice voting that has been adopted all across our country in different ways. And some of the more meaningful examples to me are how those folks who share my concerns around efficiency and cost effectiveness are some of my most conservative colleagues in elective office in red states. And that suggests to me that this truly transcends political ideology. When I show up in these moments, I don't show up as a partisan. I show up as someone who is a public servant, who is deeply concerned about the electoral process and democracy itself. So without further ado, I will pass it along back to you, Chairwoman, and thank you again for your indulgence.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your passion and stick-to-itiveness over the years in saying what you mean and being passionate about something that concerns you. So here we are today, and I'm happy to be hosting this. So anyway, we will go to Jeremy Rose, Evidence and Learning Manager for Fair Vote.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, Chair Rowe, and members of the committee for having us all here to talk about these forward-looking innovations to take our democracy to the next level. My name is Jeremy Rose, and I'm the Evidence and Learning Manager at Fair Vote Action. We are a national nonpartisan organization that advocates for reforms to deliver better elections for all Americans. I am also a proud Pennsylvanian. I grew up in York County and now live in Delaware County in the 165th Legislative District. I'm here to express Fair Vote Action support for ranked choice voting. It's often great to start in municipal elections, but we can also talk about its benefits in state and federal, primary, and general elections. Ranked choice voting, known as RCV, will improve Pennsylvania's elections by ensuring fair and more representative outcomes, particularly when there are more than two candidates and when there are crowded fields. Ranked choice voting will help political parties nominate more consistently viable candidates who unify their political parties. It will offer voters more choices on their ballots. It will promote more positive issue-focused campaigns and create a more level playing field for female candidates, candidates of color, and first-time candidates. In my role as Evidence and Learning Manager for Fair Vote Action, I conduct research to guide our strategy, including by developing case studies on where ranked choice voting has been implemented across the country. Approximately 14 million voters in 51 jurisdictions across the United States use ranked choice voting in public elections. It is an increasingly popular, party-neutral electoral reform. Let me just highlight a few of those examples. So Maine and Alaska use ranked choice voting statewide, and there are about 50 cities or localities that use it as well. The highest population jurisdiction is New York City, which held the largest citywide ranked choice voting race in U.S. history in its 2021 primaries. That's both for mayor, but also for city council and for other offices. The city had a successful voter education campaign, which helped contribute to higher voter turnout than recent primaries. There was high use of rankings, voters not only saying their first choice, but their backup choices. And there was a low ballot error rate. Afterwards, in exit polling, 95% of voters said voting with RCV was simple, and New York City successfully used RCV again in their 2023 local elections. Let's shift to Alaska. It became the first state to elect its governor, state legislature, and federal offices using ranked choice voting. Again, in exit polling, 84% of Alaska voters said the system was simple, and 60% said it resulted in more competitive races. In addition to adoptions we see of ranked choice voting through ballot initiatives, we've also seen legislative action across the country. Legislatures in 14 states have passed pro-ranked choice voting bills since 2020, including giving municipalities the option to use RCV. This includes in Maine, Utah, Virginia, and Colorado. We've also seen political parties decide to incorporate ranked choice voting into their presidential primary process. So in 2020, 5 Democratic presidential primaries and caucuses used ranked choice ballots. And in 2024, voters in Maine on both sides, Republican and Democrat, had ranked choice ballots. And the U.S. Virgin Islands became the first state or territory Republican Party to use RCV in its presidential primary. Voters have approved RCV ballot measures in 31 of the last 32 cities to vote on it. Maine and Alaska voters have also approved RCV twice now in each state when they've had to vote to adopt it and then to defend ranked choice voting. So let's get to how RCV works. It's simple. You pick your first choice and you rank your backups. In RCV elections, voters may rank candidates in order of preference, first, second, third, and so on. If a candidate receives more than half of the first choices, they win, just like in any other election. If not, then the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and voters who picked that candidate as number one will have their votes count for their next choice. This process continues until one candidate wins with more than 50% of the vote, upholding that very important belief that we should have majority winners. RCV offers greater choice, creating space for both voters and candidates to express a wide range of views. Voters may rank as many or as few candidates as they like, but in practice, most voters choose to use multiple rankings in order to express their full preferences. In short, ranked choice voting is a proven reform with several benefits for both voters and candidates. In this time of partisan polarization being a lot more intense than I think a lot of us would like it to be, it's a helpful reform, as Representative Rabb said, for incentivizing civility. One of the cool things I hear from candidates, whether it's in a nonpartisan local race in a small town or a small city, or in some of these higher profile congressional races, is that you get to focus more on the candidate than the party. And as a candidate, when you're out there knocking on doors, you might see a yard sign for one of your opponents in someone's yard, but you can still knock on that door because it's important for you to try to get some second choice support as well. And so you can still have that conversation with more voters saying, I agree with you on this issue, we might disagree on this issue, can I earn your support as a second choice? So I'm really glad you all are considering ranked choice voting as an issue, learning more about the topic, and I am happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. We will be holding our questions until all the panelists have spoken. And next we have an old familiar name, Mr. Trent England, who is the Executive Director of Save Our States.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here for the second panel. I want to start by just talking a little bit about what the experience of ranked choice voting is for a voter, because fundamentally, I think that ranked choice voting makes voting harder. We can debate how much harder it makes voting, right? But it makes voting harder. It makes tabulating votes harder. And I think it also, perhaps most distressingly in the environment that we're in today, it makes trusting those results even harder for voters. But what is the experience with ranked choice voting? I mean, you just start at the polling place. The ballot is longer, right? It has more instructions. And when you look at the places that implement ranked choice voting, like New York City, I mean, they spent over $10 million, I believe, to date, maybe much more by now, on voter re-education, right? Which is an admission that ranked choice voting is more complicated, right? You have to run educational campaigns. You have to have a lot more explanation at the top of the ballot. And then each election that's on that ballot just takes more space, right? There are more bubbles to fill in a ranked choice voting election, and every one of those bubbles represents a mistake that a voter can make, right? So we're talking about ballots with more instructions, more pages, more opportunities to make mistakes, which is why, when I first looked at ranked choice voting, I really share Representative Rabb's purposes here, right? I'm a policy guy. I want politics to be more about issues, more about the individuals who are running. I've run for office myself a couple of times, much less successfully than all of you. I love this debate. And as you said, I hope that we can find some common ground, because I think that the purposes that drive ranked choice voting, I really agree with. The problem is when you make voting harder, right? I mean, some people think, we touched on this conversation before, right? Some people think that showing a driver's license to vote is too hard, right? And then we're talking about changing the whole voting system, giving people longer ballots, more instructions to read, more opportunities to make mistakes, and somehow that's not an issue, right? I think that's very odd. And we see voters make mistakes, and I'll touch on one of the races where it mattered at the end of my remarks. But then all of these ballots, right, have to go to the election officials who have to run this tabulation system. In some cases, this requires new hardware. It always requires new software, right? Those are things that election officials can deal with. The tabulation process cannot really begin in earnest until all of the ballots are in, and they all have to be centralized for each election, or at least all of the data has to be centralized, right? So this is a little bit more complicated tabulation process, at least a little bit more complicated, and it cannot begin again. It can't begin in earnest, right, until all the ballots are there, because you're going to be eliminating the least popular candidates. Particularly, in an election where you have 4 or 5, maybe more candidates, depending on the ranked choice voting model that might be implemented, you're talking about typically eliminating candidates with very small nominal numbers of votes, which means that the margins between those candidates are very small, which means you really have to have all of that data all in one place before you can start doing that. And any mistakes that are made at those preliminary steps in the process that seem very insignificant can cascade to cause mistakes that then go unseen in the final results, right? In all of this, obviously, even as we think it through, is going to be done by a computer system, right? You feed all the data in. It's not a simple, regular election is a simple math problem, right? It's 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. It's intuitive. We could go to a kindergarten and say, hold an election. They would hold an election the way that we hold elections right now. Ranked choice voting is not that, right? You can't. Nobody's going to suggest that Pennsylvania, if they implement it, do this by hand, right? So you feed it all into the computer. The computer spits out a result at the end. It's very hard to recognize if there's a mistake in that process. And what happened with the Oakland school board race now a little more than 2 years ago is telling. You had a simple ranked choice voting election, right? This is an election with a few thousand voters, only 3 candidates, right? So this ought to be easy peasy for ranked choice voting. But about 217, I think, voters either made a mistake or wanted to send some kind of a message. They didn't rank a candidate first, but they did rank a candidate second. What do you do? Right? I mean, there's no intuitive answer to that. There are several different ways you can answer that question. What do you do? You could just say, well, this is invalid. We're going to set these ballots aside. But Oakland didn't want to do that. Oakland's rules said, before you start counting, you just shift that second place up to first place. And then you start counting. But their computer was programmed to ignore those ballots in the first round and then start counting them in the second round, as I understand the process that they implemented there. They run the election, they certify a winner. They are literally Friday before Christmas getting ready to go home in the election office in Alameda County, and they get a call from somebody, I think, connected to Fair Vote, who had just been doing research. I mean, they weren't trying to verify the outcome. Nobody thought the outcome was in error, but they reran the data and they got different results. And they realized that when you tabulated the ballots with this slight difference, with a couple hundred voters, it changed who got dropped out. When you change who gets dropped out, you change where those votes go to in the second round of tabulation, change the winner. Right? They had to go to court. The wrong winner ultimately kind of conceded and resigned. They still had to get a court order to recertify the election. And what to me is just kind of mind-blowingly frightening about all this is it was discovered by mistake. Right now, credit to Fair Vote. It was discovered, I think, by some researchers for Fair Vote, right? But it was discovered by mistake, right? Some voters make a mistake. The people running the election make a mistake. And because it's all fed into the black box, you don't see it. Because the system's not intuitive, it's hard to recognize the mistakes. So that really goes to the heart of my concerns about ranked choice voting. I think, to conclude, we all want a process that people can participate in, right? We want it to be easy to vote, but we also want it to be easy to trust the results, right? So there's a balance there, right? We have to have election integrity. We have to have participatory democracy. When you look at the results under ranked choice voting, beyond the opinion polls, it's easy to get opinion polls. You go out to voters and say, "Are you smart enough to do ranked choice voting?" And voters all say, "Oh yeah, I'm smart enough," right? Like obviously. Fair Vote does all kinds of polling that basically asks voters, do you think you're smart, right? Voters say they're smart. Not surprising. But when you look at the results in actual ranked choice voting elections, you see a lot of voters do not rank all the candidates. And you see what is probably the most severe disparate impact I have ever seen in election results coming out of New York City, where 10% of voters ranked only one candidate. I think this was the first ranked choice voting election they had in New York City. 25% of black voters ranked only one candidate, which means that black voters in New York City were 2.5 times more likely to have their ballots exhausted in that ranked choice voting election. I mean, that's like, we talk about disparate impact around driver's license laws and other kinds of drop box laws and things. I have never seen a court case alleging disparate impact at that level that ranked choice voting caused in New York City. So I think there are real issues to grapple with, even as we share the same kind of goals about what we want to achieve in our democratic process. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And our final panelist is Armin Sami, founder of RCV and volunteer with March on Harrisburg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chair Roy. My name is Armin Sami. I'm a volunteer with March on Harrisburg. And if that flavor of ranked choice voting were accurate, I wouldn't be here supporting it today. It's not abstract for me. I went to school in California for grad school, and I've used ranked choice voting. I've voted in ranked choice voting elections. And so I push back against this notion that it's too hard for voters and that voters say they're smart enough, but they're actually not smart enough to figure this out. It's really a better experience as a voter, and that's why I'm here now, is because I liked it and I wanted to continue. So in Berkeley, nobody can afford anything, so I lived in a house with 10 people. It's the norm there. And so occasionally a roommate and I would start chatting about the upcoming election, and then more roommates would appear, and eventually somebody would get a few six-packs. And we'd all sit around our living room and discuss the candidates. We'd discuss their record, their policy. We'd discuss, once there was a student running for city council, and we were wondering, like, yeah, he's 22, but do we want to be represented by a student in council? And would that be nice to have a student on our city council, or does a lack of experience disqualify him? All of these conversations were about who we want in office, not who to vote for. And we had the luxury that those two were the same. That's not always the case. You don't always get a vote for who you want in office. Too often we have to vote strategically. We have to vote for the person who is most likely to win, which is often not our first choice, especially if you're voting third party or independent, or if it's a crowded primary. Your best strategy right now is to find the top two candidates and vote for one of them. And so because of that, ranked choice voting is easier for the voter. Does it take longer to fill out a ballot? Of course, right? You're ranking things. Yeah, it takes a few more seconds to fill out a ballot. No question. But it's easier because you don't need to think strategically. All you need to do is fill out your preferences in the order that you prefer those candidates. And so it's a better and easier experience for voters. Something else I want to bring up about Berkeley. Every election cycle, a guy named Running Wolf would run for office, mayor, city council, everything. He is famous for being a Berkeley tree sitter, and so he has a lot of friends in Berkeley. And he routinely gets like 3% of the vote. I don't know if he has any policies, but 3% of people in Berkeley love Running Wolf. And nobody criticizes Running Wolf for being a part of the race. Nobody says that he is stealing votes from somebody else. We don't get that luxury. Where I live now in Pittsburgh, someone like Running Wolf were on the ballot, he would be, his integrity would be questioned. We'd ask him to get off the ballot. He would be criticized on TV. Berkeley can kind of ignore him. He's getting 3% of the vote, but people have backup choices. And so they vote for him first, but they have their second choice still count. So it's a better experience for candidates as well, because you're not trying to push out these more fringe candidates. You can really focus on the issues. It decreases negative campaigning. It doesn't solve it, but it makes it better. I actually have an ad here I received in the mail just before coming on Amtrak. Pittsburgh has a mayoral race coming up. And I got this ad in the mail saying, the Ed Gainey legacy, one of your former colleagues here, wasting millions, rewarding cronies, hurting neighborhoods. I know the person who put out this ad. I would guess that he doesn't actually believe that Mayor Gainey is rewarding cronies, right? This type of attack ad does not go away under ranked choice voting, but it disincentivizes this from happening because you're fighting for people's second and third choices. It doesn't solve the problem, it makes it better. It doesn't make everybody sing Kumbaya on a debate stage, but in Minneapolis, actually once it literally did. Candidates on a debate stage literally sung Kumbaya after a debate. So it could, Okay, so what do we want to see in Pennsylvania? What we'd really like is a local options bill. We've, as Martin Harrisburg, we've had hundreds of meetings with legislators in this body, and we know that we're not ready for statewide ranked choice voting. So what we'd really like to see is to enable cities and counties and local races to opt into ranked choice voting. And if they don't like it, they can opt out as well, but really just to have places that want ranked choice voting to have it. And I want to explain how that might work in a city like Pittsburgh, where our upcoming Democratic primary is going to decide the next mayor. That means a huge portion of the city does not have a voice because only registered Democrats get to vote in the Democratic primary. And that is disenfranchising to me. We're ignoring a huge swath of the population. There's 2 Democrats running and 2 Republicans, and the Republican race is an important exercise, but it's just an exercise. We know that that race won't have an impact on the next mayor. Imagine that working under ranked choice voting. Imagine instead of the primary, you have all 4 people running together in the general. Then Republicans can still vote number 1 and 2 for the 2 Republicans, but they can have a say between the 2 Democrats as well. If the 2 Republicans don't win, they can have a say between which Democrat they prefer. It's a better system that enfranchises more voters. So let's see. So my other role here is RCViz. I have a tool called rcviz.com, and it's an election night reporting tool, which means that on election night, you can push out, cities and counties use this tool to display their ranked choice voting results and to tell voters who's in the lead and what the unofficial results are on election night up until certification, what are the final certified results. And so in wearing that hat, I've actually sat in the room where ranked choice voting elections are being tabulated. And it is not the chaos that Mr. England has described. I was in Redondo Beach just a couple months ago for their ranked choice voting election. That's a small city in California near Los Angeles. And it was easy. They scan the ballots. You have to do that anyway. And then they take a USB stick from this computer and plug it into that computer, and they hit go. It gives you the result. You copy and paste that onto a PowerPoint and put it online. Now, I know Mr. England said that, well, that's all computerized. But in California, 1% of votes have to be hand counted. So after the press got their numbers and went home, they sat for a few hours and they hand counted 1% of the ballots, ranked choice voting, doing it all by hand. No computers, and they came up with the exact same results, exact same numbers to the T. So this notion that it's too complicated, it can't be trusted, you can't do it by hand, it's not true. Yeah, I've sat in those rooms, and it is doable. It's the software is simple, the software is often open source, you can audit it, and if you don't trust any computers, you can do it by hand, and many places do. Let's see, so the Oakland 2022 school board, yes. What he said was true. There was a configuration error in the software where a human clicked the wrong button, which led to the wrong result. It was similar to what he described, where it basically ignored, it wasn't an invalid thing. Yeah, one minute? Okay. But every issue that happens under ranked choice voting election isn't the fault of ranked choice voting. Human errors happen all the time. So notice Mr. England did not bring up that the very next year in the exact same district, they accidentally used the wrong district lines and every candidate was disqualified. Exact same district. He also didn't bring up that a New Jersey school board race the same year, basically the exact same mistake was made, not ranked choice voting, and the wrong person was seated for a couple months before somebody in the wild discovered this error. So voting errors are an issue. We need to figure out how to solve them, but they're not unique to ranked choice voting. It doesn't help, but it doesn't hurt. And so with that, I would love to take some questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists. I have so far Chair Roy and then Representative Kenyatta. And with no other questions, then I'll be asking the final question. Chair Roy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe, I could be wrong on this, but I think Alaska, the election was November 5th, I think, last year. Alaska, it took till November 20th for them to get all through this ranked choice stuff for some of the other offices. And it seems like that could really cause a lot of people to be concerned with what's going on with these outcomes. Is something going on? But I guess my real question is, that's just a concern, is in Pennsylvania, since we implemented mail-in voting, it's been very, very difficult for county election boards. Half of them literally resigned, and we have new election directors in a lot of counties, just dealing with mail-in ballots, but also absentee ballots, early voting, ballot carrying drop boxes, court decisions that are inconsistent with the law. counties are inundated right now, and the Department of State is inundated. Do you think counties in the Department of State could handle a change this major in how elections are done?
Yes. So let me address the first thing you said, which is Alaska taking too long. I fully agree, and that's why our recommendation is that ranked choice voting results need to be released on election night. It's doable. There are places that do it. Alaska, in statute, chooses not to. I think it's a bad thing. I think it reduces trust, and I think that we need to release our election results on election night, including ranked choice voting tabulation. So I agree with you there, and there are solutions. The other thing, are counties overwhelmed? Sure. It's not that much harder on election night to run a ranked choice voting election. Counties are already doing a lot, and a lot of the complication of elections is not due to ranked choice voting, but due to opening ballots and scanning and so on. So is there more work? Yes, but a lot of that work happens before the election to figure out the policies. For example, like you brought up, if somebody votes nobody on rank 1 and somebody on rank 2, you need a policy in place so you know what to do with those ballots before election day. That's where a lot of the complication comes in, is on that planning and on the voter education phase. On election night, it's really a button on a computer. And so it's not that much work for election administrators to run it. And again, I know that because I've been in rooms where they click that button.
Thank you. Rep. Kenyatta? Wait, Bob? Okay.
Yeah, I support ranked choice voting. Okay, there you go.
So my question is for, just in general, but Mr. Sami. Until Rep. Rabb came to my seat and said, I'm interested in ranked choice voting, my question was, what the heck is that? What are you talking about? I had no idea. I didn't know what it was. I hadn't heard of it. My bad, but I hadn't. And he was explaining it to me, and honestly, it sounded like bzzz, because I didn't understand anything what he was saying. I was fortunate enough to have been at a presentation in New York where a gentleman came and explained it. He talked for maybe 15, 20 minutes, and I was still confused. For me, it's visual. I have to see it in order to understand it. And so I guess my question is, how long do you think it would take? And we're not looking at, trying to implement anything. We don't even have really any legislation. But reasonably, how long would it take for a county, for a Pennsylvania, to understand it and get on board with it, especially given the fact that so many of our residents now are aging, all right? And it's probably more difficult. It might be something that they don't or can't understand. So what reasonably do you think would be an estimate of how long it would take for something like this to even be understood? Because I don't completely disagree with Mr. England about, confusion and all of that. I experienced it myself. So I just want to know, what do you think?
Yeah, let me. So there's two things you need. Two things that get explained when you talk about ranked choice voting. One is how to fill out your ballot, and that's what voters really need to understand. That takes seconds. You can explain it to them in the ballot box if they haven't figured it out. Voters understand how to do it. You talked about aging voters. You can look at this data and see that regardless of age or race, people don't make more ballot errors on ranked choice voting ballots than they do on other ballots. So is it harder to explain the whole concept of the elimination and transfer to certain populations? Maybe. Does it take more time? Maybe. But the main thing you need to get across is, how do you fill out your ballot? And then after they understand that, you can explain the rest of the process. And if they don't care, that's okay. Data shows that they still fill out their ballots correctly. Now, how long does that voter information need to take? I don't know, because it depends on how you're reaching out to people and so on. But I recommend waiting 180 days from when you say you need ranked choice voting to give time to do that voter education.
Okay, yes. Rep.
I, like you, am a visual and experiential learner. I am aggressively neurospicy, and I learn in a very specific way. And I realized after talking with you and other folks who are new to ranked choice voting that showing is radically better than telling. So with I held a small gathering, and we put up a 2-minute video about what it is, and then we just did a fake election. in person within seconds. And one of my Republican colleagues who was interested in ranked choice voting thought he knew what it was and was open, but he said, well, how does this all work? And don't you have to go back and a long process? And I said, no, it's instant. But I said, just come and you'll see for yourself. And he did it. We all did it. And it was intuitive and immediate. And he's like, oh, this is super easy. Yeah. And I think if any civic literacy programs through counties or municipalities institute what is already being done very organically, the learning curve will be very short. And the other thing is, when people realize that the spoiler dynamic is no longer at play, that makes people feel more free to rank based on what they really believe, which is really important to voters, particularly in this environment. And the last thing I want to say is, it's good for elected officials and governments because we have a better sense of how much voters care and why because of ranking. We learn there's more data we can pull for why people may have chosen folks in that order, so we can learn about is there a mandate for a particular issue in terms of people, how people campaign, et cetera, et cetera. So from a civic perspective, there's a lot of benefit to looking at the results and saying, well, what happened beyond just who won, but how did that person win based on ranked choice voting?
Madam Chair, if I may. Real briefly, because Armin is humble, I don't think he gave a shout out to his own visualization tool that he's built that's been used by election administration offices around the country. Is rcvis.com, rcviz, RC Visualizations. And I'm looking here, there's examples from New York City, from the 2021 Virginia Republican Convention, from some places in Utah. So that's one education tool. Really excited to hear Representative Rabb about your education tool, a common thing. Whenever ranked choice voting is implemented, Fair Vote and others see as our responsibility to make sure that voters have the information they need to make the most of the system. So a common educational tool, we rank things every day. You bring folks together, rank your favorite ice cream, rank your favorite county in Pennsylvania, whatever. You can get as spicy with it as you want. The last point I wanted to add is,
I'm sorry. I hate to interrupt.
Sure,
please
please.
forgive me, but we are due on the floor at 11 o'clock.
Totally understood. Thank you.
I apologize, but please stick around. And
Yes,
if anyone, if you want to finish that with someone, have those conversations. I just want to take an opportunity to say thank you to everyone who was able to join us this morning. I hope you, like I, learned a lot about both national popular vote and ranked choice voting. Thank you to all of our panelists, and everyone have a wonderful and safe day. Thank you, Chair Roy.
Thank you.